let's look at each step. So for the first is choosing a text. So you find an authentic text, and now I'm expanding this notion of authentic to mean one that includes the literal and the literary, that fits the linguistic theme, the linguistic or thematic and cultural topics or whatever of a unit or chapter in your course. And then you look for the literary. Is there anything that stands out or seems odd about the language? Is there anything that strikes you as unconventional about the text as a whole, the genre, format, imagery, or cohesion? So we sort of did that. You did some of that work, but now we're going to build on that because you have the FLLITE categories of play. So I'm going to ask you to revise or reframe some of your thinking. Go back to what you were originally thinking about what made this first conversation literary. Look at the FLLITE categories of play, and let's see if you can go further in your thinking. And if there is a norm or a convention that you're not sure about, you can do a little bit of quick research online and see if you can come to perhaps a different understanding of what makes this text literary. What makes it a literary text? There were basically 2 points that came out. One was ambiguity, and the other was the conditionality, the use of conditionals. We can imagine that this text could be chosen for an EFL class that would be the equivalent of a second semester university level course, and it would come at a point when you would be introducing first conditionals, right? So the use of present simple for the condition with a use of future simple for possible or probable result, right? Which follows then the modals of cohesion. What have you come up with that is different or new this time around in thinking about categories of the literary and the metafunctions?
As far as the visual play is concerned, we have here an example of punctuation, line number 7. No, it isn't, is it, full stop.
Right, exactly, full stop, which breaks with the convention of it being a question form. Exactly.
Well, the footnote here down at the page says that it's a dialogue conducted over instant messenger, and usually in texting we can recognize who says what, right?
Yes.
But here we have an absence of any indicators or symbols or signals that tells us that this is the end of role 1 or speaker 1, and this is the beginning of speakers
That's right.
2, right?
And yet, we can follow that it is a conversation, that there's, I heard you mentioning this, and that as opposed to typical IMing sort of language, this is written out in full sentences.
We also have pragmatic play in the first couple of the lines. The question is, do you love me? The answer is, I could. There is a deviation in relevance and quality, that seems.
Okay, so I'm going to walk you through my kind of basic interpretation, and let's see if we can go a little bit further in tying this all together. So on the ideational level, I picked up wordplay with the number 1 in the title, conversation number 1, and the last line, you first. So we come back to this notion of ambiguity. The use of number 1 in the title implies that more conversations on this topic will or should follow. But given the last line, we can't know if this will be the case. On the interpersonal level, this is pragmatic play and grammar play, responding to a question with another question or with a hypothetical. When we teach questions in standard classroom, we teach yes/no questions, and the response is either a yes, no, or maybe, or sometimes, to the adverbs, etc. And if it's an information question, you respond with information. But here, you have also this extra patterning of, do you love me? I could. But do you? How much will you hurt me if I tell you? Will you tell me truthfully? If I tell you anything at all, it will be true. Shall we come out and say it then? I suppose we should. So you have these conditionals, and you have or hypotheticals that are responding to questions. You have questions responding to questions. if you were in a different context, for example, an interview context and for a job, and you responded to questions with other questions or hypotheticals, you wouldn't get the job, right? You'd be considered to be challenging or, problematic or subversive, exactly, right? So this is contrary to the expectation. You ask a question, you expect a response. So also on the interpersonal level, continuing with pragmatic play and grammar play, you have the use of double negatives, which can imply a potentially positive response, so deviation. And along with it is what you had mentioned, the use of statement form, is it, versus the standard question form. So, I don't want to hurt you. That isn't the same as loving me. No, it isn't. Is it? No. So you have these double negatives, which normally should imply, well, maybe. It could be, it's possible, right? And the is. And also then you have this use of shall, this interesting use of shall, which is formal register, versus the less formal register, of course, on the range from instant messaging, which is very informal, to this is sort of standard. But then you have the shall we come out and say it then, instead of saying something like, well, let's come out and say it, or how about we just come out and say it. So that formality suddenly introduces foregrounding. We have on the textual level now, you mentioned, it's a dialogue poem. So what is a dialogue poem? It's actually a poem composed of a conversation between two fictitious speakers, each of whom expresses a different viewpoint. Dialogue poems, in fact, date back to antiquity. It's a common or recognized poetic form. I had no idea that there was such a thing called a genre called dialogue poems. And when I was searching for some kind of a text to use, I knew that I wanted to contrast a literal dialogue, because that's what textbooks use so much, with something that would be foregrounded or literary. And I came upon, I Googled something to the effect of poem in the form of a dialogue, and suddenly I discovered the genre. What are the conventions of writing a dialogue poem? Composed of a conversation between two fictitious speakers, each of whom expresses a different viewpoint. So coming to one of the conventions then of a dialogue poem is about voice. It says voice in a dialogue poem refers to how your speakers speak, particularly their word choices and the rhythms and structures of their sentences. The voice of each of your speakers should be distinct enough that a good reader could tell them apart without needing to be told which speaker is speaking. So how is voice foregrounded in this poem? Because a dialogue poem is already a kind of an interplay between two genres, but this poem in particular goes a step further and subverts the very conventions of a dialogue poem. So how does it do that? How is voice foregrounded? If you look at the last line, and given the fact that this is, we're told that this is through instant messaging, we can't know who wrote the last line. The you first. Who's speaking? So the voices are not distinct even in that sense, given the fact that this is instant messaging. Another convention for a dialogue poem is the advantage of a dialogue poem over single speaker forms of poetry is its ability to express and explore different viewpoints in a single poem. So choose two speakers who hold different perspectives on an issue, an event or a topic. And whether you find yourself agreeing with one perspective more than the other, you should present each of your speakers' viewpoints accurately. So how is this poem playing with or foregrounding viewpoints? And actually this ties in with a comment that you made earlier. You said, who are these speakers, right? Are these two men speaking together? Are these two women speaking together? A man and a woman? So it leaves us, we really don't know if these viewpoints are different. We don't know who they are. So are they friends? We ask ourselves as readers, what is their age, their gender, their sexual orientation, their socioeconomic class? Where are they? Why are they choosing to have this conversation via text messaging? Those viewpoints are not different. The coming together of two different perspectives often generates conflict or tension in a dialogue poem. The conflict should ultimately be constructive for the reader, if not the speakers. So how is conflict foregrounded? The conflict is not resolved, right? In fact, the tension of this poem is about the intrigue. Right? We want to know. We're left with this sense of, oh, these poor people, they can't express their love for each other. So the convention is subverted by their unwillingness, and the last line reinforces that unwillingness. Okay, you first. They finally seem to be getting to the point of saying something important, and then Boom, they subvert it again. Okay, you first. The next step, and following along in the handout here, right? So first we looked at the ideational, the interpersonal, the textual. And now this question is, how do these come together? The ideational, the interpersonal, and the textual to convey a dominant theme in this poem. So what would you say, if you had to put it into words, what might be the dominant theme? What is this poem about? But if you tell your students, well, this is about love, or it's about feelings. Let's be more specific. What is really going on in this poem?
Hesitation, conflicted feeling, indecisiveness.
Indecisiveness. If we want to think about it in terms of kind of language functions, let's say, this poem is about being gently or politely evasive or non-committal when asked to declare love for the first time. And all these meta functions work together with this foregrounding to create that. And that's the function that you would never find in a textbook. Now, the communicative language teaching approach would never say being gently, politely evasive or non-committal when asked to declare love for the first time, right? So here's the thing. Love is the context, right? Is the topic in a way. It's the topic of this poem. But the final stage then is about putting together, so the steps, once again to reiterate, choosing a text, you find an authentic text that includes the literal and the literary, you look for the literary. Reading for teaching is about going further with your intuitions and trying to match them up with the FLLITE categories of play, thinking about ideational, interpersonal, and the textual for the metafunctions, and coming to conclusions about how meaning is made in this text and what is a text about. So when you have a handle on that, then reading for writing is think about the level of the class that you're teaching and decide which dimensions of the literary in the text would be appropriate for a writing or a redesigning task. You don't have to use everything, but if there's something that you want to draw out of that play that can be useful for students. And so, for example, being gently or politely evasive or non-committal, we all experience as human beings, we're in situations where we feel don't want to be confrontational or hurtful or whatever, but I'm not ready to say yes to this proposition or this suggestion, right? So it's different from politely, functional linguistic, functional communicative language teaching. You have politely refusing an invitation, right? So first you learn how to invite someone, and then you politely refuse. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm busy. I'm not. But you respond with a very, an informational kind of a response, whereas here, it's about being politely evasive, responding with a question with another question, or a hypothetical, right? So you're using the conditional, you're using that language, but in a way that's going to help you to express a broader range of meaning. Thinking about this notion, you could then formulate a writing task by creating and thinking of a new context or situation and a suitable genre, which doesn't have to be the same. You don't have to ask your students to write a dialogue poem. It can be a very different genre that you want them to write. That is the culmination, it's the redesigning, it's the reworking of all of this reading. The reading leads to writing. You want your students now to be able to put this into communicative effect. So you design a task that you can put these elements of the literal and literary into meaningful effect. And these dimensions will constitute criteria for assessment and will guide you in developing the lesson. Can you think of something where this idea of being gently, politely evasive or non-committal might be a useful context? What's a writing assignment that maybe you could put together for students that would allow them to use this language, this playfulness?
So I have a friend, I'm thinking, and this happens to me a lot, and he is always politely evasive. And so whenever you issue an invitation, like for dinner or going out to a movie or whatever, he never responds with a yes or a no, and it's usually by email, different genre.
Yeah.
And I never know whether he's accepted the invitation or not. So we never know. It's like we're inviting people over for dinner, but he never says no. He's always politely evasive.
And this does get into cultural differences as well. Obviously, in different cultures, there are notions of what is an acceptable way to refuse or to, how do you be evasive. Right? In American culture, we tend to anticipate, that if we invite someone that they're going to respond with a yes or a no, right? but that may be very different in the language and the culture that you're teaching.
I have a question.
Yeah.
In my culture,
Yeah.
agriculture, people tend to be monophasic than the American culture. So I am teaching them English. Should I teach them the American way to convey the culture, the American culture through the text I choose?
This was an American writer who authored this poem. If that's a norm for you,
Yeah.
then foregrounding would have to take a different form.
Yeah.
But there has to be a difference in your culture between, there has to be ways that are being evasive that are different from accepting a proposition. Maybe use different language structures. Maybe you would use different ways of accomplishing that.
Maybe I can use a political subject in my case. We tend to be evasive in this.
Okay.
We don't give a direct
That's
answer
a
on
very
my
good, that's a
political-
very good topic,
Yeah.
right? In the United States too, a lot of people are quite evasive when it comes to, yes, exactly, yeah.
So Roman Cotton mentions 6 functions of language, the most important of which is the expressive function. And FLLITE has, highlighted the expressive function. We can use the cultural aspects to be expressed by the expressive function of language in order to discover the cultural barriers or differences among languages.
Yes.
And we have an example, we have in Sound and the Fury, where the main character is Benji, a mentally retarded person, misuses the use of adjectives and verbs. For Locke in the Sound and the Fury, he uses intransitive verbs because his language is very limited.
So the Halliday's function is, or Halliday's metafunctions, that's just one approach to talking about language functions. As you said, there are others, Jakobson.
Yeah.
There are many people who have talked about different kinds of functions of language. Some people are already aware of that, some people, this may be new to them, but you're absolutely right. There are a lot of different functions besides, the 3 are easy because they're so powerful, but the expressive function is another one that we talk a lot about.
So this is a way of helping to launch a concept, giving materials to work with, and you'll see as we go along with this that our idea is archiving, getting lessons that are created, flight lessons that we call, and archiving them so that people in all kinds of languages can benefit and have materials to work with. So it brings out the fact that a good choice of text for a flight lesson, we're focusing on how do you make a flight lesson. A good choice of text is one that embodies several categories of literary play and engages all of the metafunctions, right? So if you only have one element of play, it may not be strong enough. You want to really bring meaning together by that interaction between these different elements so that students start to understand context and the kinds of relationships that are established when you say things along with the content of what they're saying. And these are things that can be, again, I gave you the kinds of genres that you can use. Everyday text. We're talking about simple language for the lower division students. We're not talking about getting into sophisticated language and having it be beyond their linguistic ability to really work with. We're talking about very simple language. You can do so much if you engage with the literary, along with the literal. But a point about grammar. Grammar reference books typically do not address foregrounded meanings and uses, right? So grammar textbooks are always about defining and exemplifying and pedagogically scaffolding the literal, or what I call prototypical. Another work that my concept originally was not talking about foregrounding so much as prototypical meanings and uses and their metaphorical extensions. Comes from prototype theory. But in any event, grammar reference books do not work with this. So this is the area that I find that people grapple with the most. Teachers, language teachers grapple with the most. How do you play with grammatical paradigms? How do you, grammatical metaphors are easy enough to conceptualize using a noun as a verb, etc. But how do you play with grammatical paradigms? You have this example of the dialogue poem. You have a lot of examples on our website. My textbook, The Literary in the Everyday, which is one of the most open forms of textbooks that you can have. It's in Google Docs. It's hosted by COERLL. And teachers can download it. This is teachers of French, right? But teachers can download it and they can do whatever they want to change the activities, manipulate the text in whatever way they want, and use it as long as they maintain attribution. If you look at my textbook, a lot of the instructional language is in English, because that is another assumption, is that this kind of work can be done in the first language, the L1, or at least the common language for a class. And you can see how I play and bring in that element of play with grammar. So what I would like to say to you, though, is challenge yourselves in reconceptualizing grammar topics by interpreting their foregrounded meanings. It's going to bring you a sense of richness. I mean, I over the years had, it was, again, my intuitive approach, and I work intuitively in this way with literary in the everyday. And it's brought so much satisfaction. The logistics of getting through our lives and our professions are hard, and we're working so hard. The literary in the everyday brings joy, I find. So keep that in mind and challenge yourselves to reconceptualize grammar by looking at foregrounded meanings. Another way of thinking about this, Carl in his introduction mentioned Leon Van Patten's book about making communicative language teaching happen. Leon Van Patten's book really is about the literal, right, the literal side. So in expanding this paradigm to include the literal and the literary, and another way of thinking about it is that the FLLITE approach helps to explore what structured input might look like for the literary. So if you're familiar with the notion of input processing and structured input, for those of you who are familiar, think about, now we're talking about what does structured input, or what might it look like for the literary, not just the literal. And then again, another comment about authentic texts. If we're thinking about authentic texts as texts that encode in some way the literal and the literary, it gives a new spin. We always talk about authentic text as needing to be a native speaker, or even having native speaker competence, writing for other native speakers. The first text that I use in my textbook is a poem that I wrote in French. And it's a very simple poem because it's for the first class, right? It's about introducing someone and using that language of introductions. I encoded the literary in it by a grammatical metaphor of using nouns as adjectives, which is something that standard textbooks never do. But also your students. Students can create authentic texts if they are effectively including play.